Hello friends and welcome back to another tips and tricks video. Today we are going to build this weather app using VUE.JS and weather API. And it's a relatively easy project, but it's a good practice, especially after we learned all about Vue.js in the past two videos. So as you can see, I have a search field here. I can search for the name of a city, for example, Sydney, Australia. And if it is daytime in that city, it's going to be a light background. If it is nighttime, it's going to be a dark background. And I also get the 3-day forecast and more info, and I can delete a city if I want to. So all of this info is coming from weatherapi.com, and you can open an account here, which is free and doesn't require a credit card, and get your API key because we're going to use it. So also for this project, I'm going to use Google Fonts, Font Awesome, and Tailwind. And I also have this folder on my GitHub that is called Vue Weather App Raw Components. And within them, I just have the template for each of these components we're going to use to save us time. And this is just HTML and CSS. So we will go through these as we build our application. So let's get started by creating our application using terminal, and I'm going to say npm create view at latest. So this will prompt us with the name that we want to choose. I can call it weather app, and I don't need anything. I want to keep everything simple. I don't need PNL, router, or testing. I don't need anything except ESLint and prettier. So I'm going to say no to everything and cd into weather app and npm install. Now that is done, and since we are installing dependencies, I'm going to bring in Tailwind. So let's go to Tailwind website, installation, and we want to go to framework guides and then to Vite, and then using Vue. So we can install using this command. Just a side note, we can also create our Vue application using Vite. But anyway, let's add Tailwind to our project. And while this is doing its thing, we can copy this npx tailwind css init to initialize our config file. So I'm going to paste it in here. There we go. So now we can open VS Code and see what we got. All right, so in VS Code, the first thing I want to do is to clean up everything. So I don't need this icon in the source folder. I don't need these files except main.css. So I'm going to keep the file, but delete the content so I can bring in Tailwind directives in a second. So I'm going to leave it open. In the components folder, I'm going to delete everything. In the app, which is our root component, I'm going to delete everything and just add my own template. And instead of a div, I will use main and just say home. So we have something on the screen. All right, so let's go down the list. In the index.html, I'm going to delete this link and also paste Font Awesome and Google Fonts in here. So let's go to CDN.js, grab this link for Font Awesome, and I will put these links in the description. So I'm going to copy this one, and in the project, I'm going to paste it in the head of the project and go to Google Fonts. I'm using Poppins, and I selected these 4 variations. So I'm going to copy these links and again paste it here. So let's reformat it, close the head so it's clean, and save it. Inside the Tailwind config, we need to add the files which may contain Tailwind classes. So let's go to Tailwind website again and grab this piece of text and add it to the content array. This will just make sure when we deploy our application, all the unnecessary CSS classes are gone. So let's save it and close it. We don't need it anymore. And go back to Tailwind website and let's grab these directives. So I'm going to copy these at sign directives and add it to our main.css. And underneath, I can add the Google font. So I can say at layer base. So I'm going to target the base layer and grab the body element and just set the font family to Poppins and sans serif. So let's save this one, close main.css, and in index.html, we have this div with the ID of app, which is our wrapper for our Vue application. I'm going to add some global classes. I'm going to say that the min height should be screen. So that is saying 100 view height, and BG Zinc 100, so a bit of a mild background, and the padding of 8 all around. That's it. So we can close index.html now. All we have now, it's our template. Let's close this terminal and open an integrated terminal in VS Code, and let's run npm run dev. So let's go to that localhost. There we go. We have our home up there. I'm going to put this side by side with VS Code. Okay, I also have the console open here so we can see if there is any error. The first thing I want to do, instead of this home, I'm going to get the local date up here. I'm going to create comments as we go along. So this should be the date, and there is going to be a div for a wrapper. And inside of this div, I will have a new date, and then I will chain the local data string. So it will give me something meaningful like that. but still this is not what I want. I want the full day of the week and the month and so on, so I can add some options to this just like that. So I added the locale and how I would like to see the weekday, the year, and the month, as you can see up there. And let's add some classes here. So I'm going to say class text center and margin bottom 6. That's it. So we can close this one because we don't need to touch it anymore. The next part is the search field. So I'm going to make a comment, call it search, and create a div for the wrapper. And I'm going to create a component for our search. So let's create a component here, call it search input.view or search field. And let's go to GitHub page. And I'm going to close everything that I don't need here. So Tailwind, we don't need it anymore. CDN, don't need it. Font awesome, don't need it. All right, so in the GitHub folder, we have this search field.view. And I'm going to grab everything here and paste it inside the component we just created. All we have, it's a form with one input field and a wrapper which will contain the suggestions for the cities. So if the user types something in the field, we will get the suggestions and the user can click on it. Before adding any functionality, let's add it into the DOM by importing it inside the root component. So on the very top, I'm going to create my script tag, and this is going to be a setup script setup, sorry. And I can say import search input from the components folder, and down here I can use it search input and self close it. So the first thing we need here in our search component is a property to bind to this search input for the V model. So I'm going to use reactive for this one because I like reactive, and because I'm going to use an object that would be related to this search. So I'm going to call it search term, and this is going to be reactive. So I'm going to import reactive from Vue and pass an object to it. So the first thing I want is a query, and I'm going to set it to an empty string at first. So this search term, now we can use it in our component. On the input element, I'm going to use V model and just type search term dot query. So now it is bound to this one. To make sure this is working, I'm going to output it right above the form. So search term dot query, and let's give it a refresh and type something in here, and it is working. So let's delete that output. That was just a test. So the next thing we want to do, we actually want to do something as the user types in here. So we want an action. So let's create a function here. So let's call it handle search. And this is going to be an arrow function. And what I want to do first, I just want to console.log that query. So I'm going to search search term.query. And when are we going to invoke this function is going to be on every keystroke. So every time user types something in here. So we can listen for the input on this input field and just pass that handle search down here. Let's see if this works the way we want. So as I type, you can see in the console, we are getting 3 different logs. So that means 3 times this was invoked or executed. That's not exactly what we want. We don't want to execute this function on every keystroke. We want to give it a delay, and we can use a set timeout to achieve what we want. So set timeout function takes a callback function as its first argument, and as its second argument, it takes the delay in milliseconds. So I want to say, for example, 500 millisecond or half a second. Now, inside of this callback function, I'm going to console.log this query after 500 millisecond. So let's save it and start again. If I type something here, you can see it ran 3 times again, but it actually waited for me, in a sense, waited for me to type. Now, if I type slow, again, that would give me the same result. You can see like I am typing slowly, and you can see I'm getting the result. And this function is being invoked every single time. Again, this is not what we want. So one thing we can do, we can save this set timeout inside the variable and then clear it every time we go inside this function. So let's do that. So I'm going to create a timeout here, and I'm going to set it to null. So this is kind of related to our search term. That's why I'm creating it down here. So first, I'm going to save this timeout inside this variable. We can say search term dot timeout equals to this set timeout, and then above it I can say clear timeout, that's search term timeout. Now every time we type in here, the function is going to run, right? So it goes inside this function and it clears the timeout, and then it goes down to run it again, but it waits 500 millisecond. So by the time it goes back up there to run it again, there is another timeout clear. So basically, we are creating some sort of a lazy load or some sort of a debounce. So let's type something here. There we go. And you see that it ran only one time. Now again, because this is 500 millisecond, if I type very slowly, you can see it's running after each half a second. Okay, that's nice. That's what we want. But of course, we don't want to just log whatever the user types. We want to show the matched results down here. And for that, we are going to use our weather API autocomplete. So let's go to weather API. And when you open an account, you will be headed to your dashboard and you will have your API key. So let's copy that API key and let's go to API Explorer down here. In the API Explorer, we can paste our API key, and down here, we can select our API we want to use. We want to use search autocomplete. Our query for now is London. So we're just going to leave it as it is and click show response. So this will give us the call to that API we need. It also gives us the response header and the body. So we found two match for that query. So we get an array of objects. So let's grab this URL, and inside of this timeout, I'm going to fetch that data. So let's create a res variable and set it to fetch, and using backticks, paste that URL. I'm using backticks, of course, because I want to make that query dynamic. Now we know fetch returns a promise. So this function needs to be an async function. So we can pass async just before the parentheses and the keyword await just before the fetch. Now, instead of London as our query, we are going to use the template string and pass the search term query. So basically whatever the user types in here. This res is not what we want, of course, right? So we want to create a data variable and again, await for the res JSON. So because JSON function returns another promise, and now we can log that data. Okay, let's give it a run and see if it works. So I'm going to search, for example, for Kent, and it ran only one time. That's what we want. It gave me an array of 5. So apparently there are 5 locations in the world that matches this Kent. So it starts with Kent. Now this is exactly what we want, and we want to populate this wrapper down here with these information. So we need to save it somewhere. So I'm going to create another property under search term reactive object, and I'm going to call it results, and I'm going to set it to null or an empty string, doesn't matter. So inside our handle search function, let's do some checks before actually running this. So I'm going to first check if the search term query is not an empty string, then run all of this. So, and I will add an else later on. So for now, I just want to leave it as it is. I just want to make sure this is not an empty string. And where we are grabbing our data, underneath that, I'm going to populate these results. So we can say search term results equals to data. Instead of console.log, let's console.log this search result down here. Let's see what we get. So refresh, and again, Kent. And we get the same thing, and of course it's a proxy array because it is reactive. So we get the array of 5. That's exactly what we want. Now we want to show this down here, so we have access to this results array. So down here where we have a button, we want to create a button for every single item in here. So on the div, which is the wrapper, I can use the v-for and say for every city or place, let's call it a place, because it might not be a city. In search term dot results, do something. And of course, this is a v-for, and we need to bind the key to something unique. So we need to use the key attribute and bind it to something unique to avoid, funny behavior. So we're going to bind it to place ID because every place or a city has a unique ID, and we're going to bind it to that one. For the button content, we are going to output the place name as well as the region and the country. As you can see here, every city or every place has name, region, and country. So we want to say place.region and then comma space place.country. Let's see if this works. Also, I saved it and we already have the data inside this wrapper. A few things here before we actually apply any click event to these buttons. Let's give it a refresh. If I type here, this runs and we have what we want, exactly what we need. Now, if I use backspace and delete here, you can see it doesn't go away. So in this if statement, we are checking if the query is not empty, then do this. And we want to say if it is empty, put this result back to null. So I can say search term dot results equal to null and refresh. So if I search for something, it gives me the result, but if I want to delete it, it will go away. We could also make sure this v-for is not even rendering if there is nothing in the results. So I can wrap this whole thing, this div, with another div, because we cannot have v-for and v-if on the same wrapper. So here I can say v-if and check for something. I want to say if search term results gives me something, rather than null, then do this. Otherwise, don't. We could also say if it is not null, like that, then do this. So this should work. If I say Kent, this works. And if I delete it, it's gone. Great. So we are still outputting here the search result. So I'm going to delete this one too. Now the next step is to click on these buttons and get the ID of each city. So if I click on these ones, something should happen. And we can create another function up here, just right under handle search. I'm going to create another function, call it get weather, because essentially we want to get the weather for that location. And this is going to be another arrow function which would accept the ID of that place. And so for now, let's just log that ID that we are getting from each city. So this needs to be attached to this button because we want to click on this one and get the ID. So it's easy. We can just say at click, get the weather, and this accepts an ID. So I can just say place.id, just like up here, because we are looping through each place and we are getting the ID. So let's save it, reformat it, and give it a refresh. Search for London, for example, and click on London. It gives me the ID. This one in Canada gives me the ID, and so on. The next step is to actually get the weather because we don't want the ID. And let's go back to Weather API and API Explorer. We already have our API key up here, and the query is London. Now, instead of search autocomplete, we are going to get the forecast. The nice thing about forecast is that not only it gives us the current weather, it also gives us the forecast of the next few days. And in this case, I only want 3 days. You can take as many as you want, but on a free account, you can only get 3 days. We don't need air quality or weather alerts. So let's click show response, and there we go. We get the URL again with this forecast. We get an object with 3 main properties. We have the location, which is the name of the city, and more info about that city. We get the current weather, which is today, and the forecast, which is for the next 3 days. And we can get also the hourly weather, which is, I think it's unnecessary. And you can see here, I'm getting empty objects. And that is because we have something in our dashboard in Weather API website. It's called API response field, and we can turn off the things we don't want. So I turned off all the hourly responses because it's just too much data and I don't need it. So anyway, we are going to grab this URL here and back to the project, and we are going to do something similar to here. So I'm going to create a const res and set it to await fetch and use the backticks again and paste that URL and make sure this function is async. Now this query cannot be London because we want it to be dynamic, and we could pass ID down here. This would be wrong though, because the Weather API documentation specifies that we cannot do that. So let's go to request parameters here, and you can see the request parameters accepts different parameters, but one of them is the ID returned from Search API. That's what we are getting. We need to pass ID colon and then the number, right? So ID colon and then the number. So let's go to our project and add ID colon and then the ID. So the rest is the same. After we get the response, we are going to create our data. That would be the same as res.json, just like what we did above. And now let's console.log that data. Let's reformat the code, save it, give it a refresh, search for a city, and click on it, and we get that location data. You can see we have the current forecast and location. Now what I'm going to do here, I'm going to create a file, call it temp or for temporary.json, because I want to grab this object, just right click, copy object, and paste it here to make sure I have this somewhere so I can look at it if this goes away. Because sometimes I'm going to save this one and I will get an error and I cannot see it. It's just going to be a pain. So I'm going to keep this here because we need to know what we get on a correct response. Anyway, now we know we are getting the right data. We just have to save it again somewhere to an array because we want to give the user the ability to output more than one place. So we need to actually send this data back to the root component because this is where we are going to output the city's cards. We are inside the search input right now, and we need to send this data back to the Vue root component and then do something with it here. So inside the root component, I'm going to create a variable. Let's call it places, and I'm going to set it to ref, and it's going to be an empty string. Okay, so for now, we're just going to leave it there. And in the search input, we are going to emit an event when we click and get the weather and then send this data. So right under the input, let's define our emits. So define emits, and this will take an array. Let's call it place data. So now we need to save this. So const emit, so we can call it inside this function. After we are getting the data, we want to emit the place data, and also we want to send up to the parent that data. So I can delete this console.log. So I hope this makes sense. We are emitting or creating our custom event listener, and among that emit, we are sending the data. So back in the root component here, we need to listen for that event. So we can say at what do they call it? Place data, and we want to create our own add place function. So I can create that function here, add place, and this is going to be a callback function, and this is getting the data. So we are accepting as a parameter. So because the data is coming from our custom event listener. So let's console.log that data, see what we get first. So we should get the city's info before even pushing it into this array. So let's say London and click. There we go. We get the London's location, and we can make sure by checking the location down here and it says name London. Okay, of course, well, we don't want to log it again. We just want to push it to that places. So I can say places.value because it's a ref.push, and we're going to push the data. So to make sure this is working, I'm going to create another comment here and say weather cards. Essentially, the weather cards will go in here and create a div, and inside this div, I'm going to create a p tag which will contain the cities from this array. So I'm going to use a v-for and say for each place in places, just output place.location name. So we want to get the location's name, and I don't need the key here because I'm just testing things out. So let's add a few cities, London, for example. And if I click, we get London down here. Let's add another one, Sydney, for example. There we go, it works. By the way, every time we click on this one, we need to clear this one and also close this dialog. So let's go back to search input and where we have the get weather data. So right after we are emitting something, or before, it doesn't matter, we can say search term dot query equals to an empty string, and also search term dot results is going to be the initial value, which is null. Okay, let's do it again, refresh. So if I add a city and click, this will go away and we get the name of the city because we are looping through that array. The next step is actually to create our weather cards. All right, so let's create a component in components folder, and let's call it weathercard.view. And let's go to GitHub and grab everything from weathercard view. So I'm going to grab all of this, copy it, and paste it here. And I'm going to close search input component for now. I don't think we need it anymore, so I'm just going to close it. And here you can see we have a template that contains some info, and I added these placeholders kind of thing. So what we need to do here is just replace these with the real data we want to use. And I also noticed just now, I just noticed that this is dynamic data we are getting from the object, which should be at first, because this is the raw component, it should be empty like this. That was one thing I forgot to delete. So we know we are getting this object for each city, right? And we need to go through these properties and get the info we want. So imagine this is a place. So let's call each object a place. That means we need to accept a prop. Let's say define props, and we are going to accept a place, which is going to be an object. Down here, we need the place, which is this object, location name. That's the location name. So instead of this one, I'm going to use mustache syntax and say place.location.name. And I'm going to copy this one because I need the local time. So in the object, we also have local time. So if I copy this one and add it here, this will give me the local time in this format. So it's the date and the time. But all I want is this hour and the minute. So we can do something with this one. Wrap it with the parentheses and use the new date, and then tell that function to just get the hours for me. So this is a function, and right outside of the curly mustache syntax, add a colon and then add another mustache syntax, and then copy this whole thing and just change this one to get minutes. I know it's a bit, it's too much code for something simple, but this is the only way we can do it. This will give us this time right here. All right, so that's the local time and date. Local time and the location. So I can close this one. For the current weather, we need the image source. So if we go back to that object, we can close the location. We're done with it. In the current property, we have a condition object, which contains the icon and the text for that condition, for the current condition. So we need to go to the place current condition icon for the icon. So let's again bind this source to place.current.condition.icon. Now this should be the same for the text. So down here where it says weather condition, I'm going to use the mustache syntax and add condition.text. For the weather temperature, we don't need to go inside the condition because it is right inside the current temp C. I can use that one and delete the condition and just add .temp_C. Now this one gives us a decimal number. Right now it's not, because for this particular city it was a round number, but it will give us a decimal number, which we can make it round by math.round. So we wrap it in parentheses and say math.round. And to use the degree sign, which is just a circle on top of the number, we can use @deg semicolon. So this would be that circle on top of the number, which we will see in a moment. And I can close this one. So with the weather location, we are also fine. I also have this border line, which is just a border, and it's a component, and I can create it right here. So border line, this is really nothing special. It is just one line of HTML. So if we go to our folder on GitHub, we have a borderline view, and I'm just going to copy this thing and add it here. Okay, so this might be unnecessary to be a component, and there's only one of them. So I just wanted to make sure if I have borderline somewhere else, I can edit that file and it will be affected everywhere. And it's also a good practice. So I'm going to import that borderline from borderline view. So now it will not give me a warning. I think for now we're good. We can actually output this one and we will add these info later. So let's go back to our root component and import that weather card. Import weather card from components, and we know we expect a place as an object. So down here, instead of this v4, I can kind of delete this one. The v4, I will add it on the wrapper. So we want to have a weather card and close it, and this would need a place. So we need to loop over places array and give the place to this card. So let's add v4 to the wrapper and say for each place in places, now give me the place. So for the key here, because it's a v4 and we need the key, we need to think of what do we want to bind here. We have an array and they all have an index. We could either use that or grab one of these properties, whichever works for you best, but I'm just going to use the index. So on the root component where I am saying place in places, I can also grab the index of every element, so IDX, and I'm going to use that as the key. So let's give it a refresh and see what we have. London, and I click on this, London, and we have the city, of course. I'm zoomed in here, by the way. And also, I forgot, there is no background on these weather cards. So on the weather card component, on the div, which is the top one, I'm just going to add BG Blue 500. The reason there is no background is that I am going to add dynamic background, so it would be dark for nighttime and light for daytime, but you can see it's working. And also we can add more cities. So let's add, for example, Sydney, Australia, and we have two, and I want it to be this grid of 2 columns. So I'm going to wrap this with another div. So cut it for a second, div, and on the wrapper I can say class grid and grid columns 2, and let's give it a gap of 4. And again, I'm zoomed in here, that's why it looks kind of too big. So you can see this circle thing is because of that degree kind of special code we put in here. I kind of don't like it because it pushes the number to the left and it's kind of odd and it's not centered. I can add margin right -2. So this will push it to the right a bit, or 4, but I'm going to leave it as it is. For now, it's fine. It looks centered. So let's add the forecast, which is going to be 3 days down here. And this is relatively easy. Let's create our component. So in the components folder, I'm going to create another file, call it weather forecast day.vue. And let's go to GitHub. We have weather forecast day, and I'm going to grab everything and add it in here. So this one is quite easy. All we have is the day of the week, so Sunday, Monday, and so on. And we have the icon just like this one, but smaller. And then the high and the low of that day. So we need a day. So let's go to this object. You can see we have a forecast object. And within the forecast, we have a forecast day, which is an array. So each object in this array is a day. So we can accept a day as a prop. Inside our component, I'm going to say define props, and I'm going to accept a day as an object. So each of these objects will be our day. The first thing, we need the day of the week. So I can say day.date. So we have a date value or property here. Now this will give me the date again. I don't want it. I just want the day of the week. And I can do the same thing with what we did here up here with the date. So I can say new date and pass that day, that date, and chain to local data string, add the locale, and then in the options I can say the weekday, I want it to be long. I just want the weekday. So this will give me either Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, whatever the day is. All right, for the icons, we need to go inside the day, and then we have another day. So for, in this case, this is the name of our property, and this is the name of the property of the object. So it's going to be day.day. So for the icon, we're going to bind it to day.day.condition.icon. So again, you can see we're going inside the day, another day, and condition icon. Then we have the max and the min temperature. So we can grab that from day.day. Again, this is inside the same day object. We have max temp and min temp. This again will give us a decimal number, you can see here, and we want to round this one. So I can say, I can wrap it in parentheses and use math.round. And I'm going to copy this whole thing and add it here. So this will be min temperature. All right, and that's it. This is what we have for our forecast. I don't need to do anything here. I can close it, and inside our weather card, I can import it up here. So I'm going to say import weather forecast day, and down here we have a placeholder for it. So I can say weather forecast day. This needs a day. We passed the day as a prop, and we need to now accept that day. So we already accepting the place, which is again this whole object. So we need to get the place and then forecast day. So we are going to loop over this forecast day array. So we want to say on the wrapper, for each day in place.forecast day, then give us that day. For the key, again, I'm going to use the index. So I'm going to accept the day and IDX or index. Let's give it a save, and there we go. We have our data down here. That is our forecast. And the next big part, which is almost towards the end, is this more info. So when we click on this more button, we need to see that info, which is this one. So first, let's create its component. So inside our components folder, I'm going to create another file, call it weatherinfo.vue. And let's go to GitHub, grab the code we need from weatherinfo.vue and paste it here. So this one is actually accepting the same place as the root component, or not the root component, but the parent component, because we are done with the forecast. We are back to the current. We have the place, and then we go inside the current and get the data. So we are going to accept a prop that is going to be the place. Define props, and it's going to be place, and again an object. We have a close button up top, which we will take care of it later, and then we have the wind speed down here. So let's use must-I syntax. We need to go to place current dot, we have wind kph, that is just kilometers per hour. So I'm going to add my own text right after the number, and we're going to do the same thing for humidity. So this one is called humidity, and this is going to be a percentage sign, and the same for precipitation. That's a big word for me. And the value for this one, I believe, is this one, and it's in millimeters. So I'm just going to add next to it. Next, we have the wind direction. So I'm going to copy one of these and add it down here. Wind direction, it just gives us, is it like north, northeast, and so on. So it's a wind there, and down here, copy this one again. And for the feels like, we will have a temperature that it says feels like, and it's going to be decimal. So again, I want to round this one by wrapping it inside a math dot round. The last one is UV, and honestly, I don't know what is the unit for UV. So I'm just going to leave it as UV. I don't know, it's a percentage, it's a millimeters, I have no idea. Anywho, at the bottom of that container, we have the last update, and all we want is this last update property. And we don't want to change anything. We exactly want the date and the time. So I'm going to grab this must-have syntax again, and you can see here there is a extra curly brackets which we don't need. So I'm going to go to place current and grab the last update and chain it down here. And then we have a trash icon which will be deleting the card, and we will add the functionality later. Save it, and let's actually use it in our weather card. So again, remember, we are accepting a place for all of this. Let's import it in the parent, which is the weather card. So import the weather info from our components down here. We don't need to loop over it because there's only one. So we can say weather info and pass the place. We already have access to the place as a prop. So I can just pass it down here. And if I save it, there we go. We have the info regarding that city. Now, of course, we need to hide this at first and then show it when the user clicks on this more button. So we are on the parent, which is our weather card, right? So I'm going to create a property here, and I'm going to call it show detail. So this is going to be a ref, and we're going to import it from Vue. And at first, it's going to be false. So down here on the wrapper of this weather info, I'm going to attach a v show instead of vif, because this probably will toggle quite often. I'm going to set it to that show detail, which is false at first, so we will not see it. Now, when we click on this more button, this down here, on the button itself, I can listen for a click and set that show detail to true. Let's add a city, all right, and we click more, and we have it here. And we still cannot close it because now this one is in the child component. All right, let's go to the child component, which is the weather info, and we have that close button up here. So we don't have access to this show detail in the child component. Therefore, we need to emit an event. So this is quite easy because we just want to send an event listener. We don't want to send any data. So we can just say listen for a click and emit. I'm going to do it in line. Emit close info. I'm going to call it close info. On the parent weather card, I'm going to listen for that close info on this component. So this is our component, right? This white wrapper. So I'm going to listen for that close info, and all I want to do again, just set the show detail to false, which will close this wrapper. So let's refresh, add a city, click on more, and click on this one. There we go, it's gone. So it is working the way we want. The next thing is this delete button. We need to delete something and remove it from the array. Now this is a bit tricky because the delete is in this child component. This needs to send the info back to the weather card, and then the weather card send it to the root element. So we have to go 2 level up. We could use a store for this like Pinia, but again, this is just a silly example, and it's just one event that is going to be going up 2 times. So we're just going to use emits. So on the child component, weather info, we have this button. The first thing we want to do is to listen for a click and emit something. Now, right now, we are not sending any data. We're just emitting something because on the component, the parent, we are going to send the name, which is again in the parent. I'm just going to call it remove place or delete or whatever, remove place. So we're going to emit an event called remove place. Let's go to the weather, and we are on the same component weather info, and I'm going to listen for that remove place. Again, we want to emit another event here. We want to call this one again remove place maybe. Let's call it delete place so we know it's a bit different. This time I'm going to send the place name. So we have access to the place, and we already know we can grab it from this. So we can say place location name. So I am going to send that name up there. I know it's a bit confusing because we are going up, we are emitting 2 times. So the child is sending call, if you will. So it's shouting to the parent, says, "Hi, parent." And the parent says, "What?" Parent again says, "Hi, grandparent," which is this root element. And this one says, "Okay, what do you want?" So now we can create our function here. Let's call it remove. Did I call it remove? No, on the second one, I called it delete place. So I'm going to call it delete place. So we are accepting a name, right? So let's see what is that name. So on the search, I'm sorry, on the weather card, which is the component that we are emitting something, we are going to listen for that delete place. And we want to invoke this function whenever we click on that one. So delete place. Okay, let's see how this one works. So let's add a city and London. And let's click more. Let's click on this one. We should get London in the console. There we go. It works. So now we don't want to get the name in the console. We just want to delete it. So we want to go back to this places array. So I want to say places.value is going to be equal to places.value.filter. So we are going to filter the array and set it back to its own variable and take away this particular object or city or whatever place we want to call it. So we want to say for each place or P in this array, check if the item's location name, it is not the same as the name we are passing into it. If the name is not the same, return the array and remove that one. Or in other words, remove that particular object with the same name and return the rest. So let's see if this works. I'm going to give it a refresh here, add two cities, London and Sydney maybe, and maybe one more, Berlin, and I'm going to put this down. So we have right now 3 cities, and I'm going to delete Sydney here. So I'm going to go to more and click on this one, delete, and it's gone. And you can see this is another behavior, funny behavior. This is not going away. So we can close this one while we are emitting events. So on the info card, I'm sorry, on the weather card, we have this show detail. So we need to set this show detail to false when we are emitting this event right here. So we can't do this in line anymore. I'm going to define my emits up here. So I'm going to say const emit equals to define emits, and what did we call it down here? Delete place. Paste it back up here. It has to be a string, I'm sorry. So down here, again, I'm going to say const remove place and set it to a callback function. Now here, we are not accepting anything at this point, but what we want to do, we want to emit this one. So I'm going to cut this one out for a second and call that remove place from up here. We want to emit the delete place, and then we want to send this place location name. Now we cannot just say place because at this point place doesn't mean anything, it's just a prop. So we can accept a place name and down here send that place name. So where we are calling the function down here, remove the place, we can pass that place location name. So that would give us the name of this location. So London, City, Sydney, or whatever. And of course, here I just want to say show details value equals to false. All right, so let's see if this is working. I'm going to add a couple of cities here, London and Berlin, for example, or whatever that is. So I'm going to delete London, go to more and delete this one, and it works. So it was a bit, a headache that we have to do this, but it's working. So this is when I would say a store would come in handy. So we don't have to do all of this emitting and props and listening for things, because with the stores these things can get easier. But I thought this is also a good practice to not use a store and emit events back and forth. We are able to add, delete, and click and close the info and all of this, and right now everything is working fine the way we want. On a side note, you notice this wrapper, this container is very snappy, so we don't have any transition. So let's do that. Inside the weather card, we have this weather info. So we need to wrap this with a special component from Vue, and that is called a transition. So a transition is a special component from Vue that we don't need to import it. It is available for us to use it anywhere we want to. And if we go to Vue documentation quickly and just search for transition down here, you can see it's a special component and it works for vif and vshow. And we have these directives on v enter active, v something, and so on. So these directives that are related to the transition. And we have a chart down here that says what happens when we use these directives. So we have v enter from. Basically, we are saying the component should enter from opacity 0 for example, and then 2 opacity 1. So it's going to be like 0 to 1, and then when it's leaving the DOM, it's going to be from 1 to 0. And this state here called we enter active, and these two together is called we leave active. And in this example we see on the documentation, we have a named transition, which I really prefer. I don't like to use these default names because maybe I have more transition and it's also much cleaner. So if we copy this name and add it to our transition, and down here we can create a style tag and make it scoped to make sure it's not going anywhere outside of this component, and then copy these classes. We are saying when the fade, which is this transition, enters the DOM, it's going to be opacity 1. So we don't have to specify it. It's by default is opacity 1. And also when it is leaving, it's going to be opacity 1. Now, when it is entering, it's going to be from opacity 0. When it is leaving, it's going to leave to opacity 0. So these are the keywords, to and from. So this will take 500 milliseconds, which is too much. I want 200. And let's give it a roll. So I'm going to search London again and zoom in and click more. And there we go. We have that nice transition. Next thing, or the last thing I believe, I want to add the functionality for day and night. So I'm going to grab some styles, and in the weather card component, right at the bottom where we have the fade classes, I'm going to add these BG day and BG night. So these are just custom classes, and we have a custom background and a linear gradient, nothing special. So all I'm going to do here, I'm going to set the background of these cards dynamically. So let's go up here where we have the wrapper. So the whole wrapper, right now I'm just saying BG blue 500. I'm going to delete that one, and I'm going to bind class dynamically. So what I want to look here, we have some property here. It's called current is day. And if it is 0, it means it's night. If it is 1, it is day. So we want to say if the place dot current dot is underscore day is 1, then apply bg day. If it is not, then it's night, of course. We're gonna say bg night. That's it. Let's save it. And of course in London right now it's 3 a.m. so it's nighttime. Let's add Sydney, and I believe it's daytime. Yep, there we go. So if it is nighttime, it's going to be dark. If it is daytime, it's going to be light. And now we have the info. We can close it. We can delete a city. There we go. And another thing I would say, it's not necessary, but in my demo, I had a confirm dialog here. So right here where we are deleting the card, we can check if confirm, for example, are you sure? I'm sure you are familiar with this confirm function from JavaScript. So this would return a true or false based on the user input. So this will give us a dialog with this text. Are you sure? So let's give it a roll. And London again. It's easier to type. And if I press delete, it will give me, are you sure? Nope. So nothing's going to happen. But if I say, yes, I'm sure, it's going to go away. So that was just a tiny little touch there. And I think with that, we're done. So that's it, guys. So this is our Vue weather application thanks to Weather API with their nice API Explorer and their nice APIs, which had search complete, and it was completely free. I really like this Weather API, and the only thing that I thought it's a bummer is their icons. They are kind of low resolution, and we could apply our own custom icons, but that would be a lot of work because we need to check. They have many conditions, so we need to check if the condition is this, then the icon should be that. So it's a bit of a tedious work, but anyway, this is our weather application. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope this has been helpful. Thank you guys for all your likes, subscribes, views, and support. It's really encouraging for me to see you are liking my content. Thanks again for watching. See you at the next one. Bye bye.